I'm just a grandmother who once believed that love could mend anything, but nothing, and I mean nothing, prepares your heart for the moment your own daughter looks you in the eye and says, "You're dead to me." I had to sit with those words. I had to feel them crawl through my bones like winter chill through an old broken window. That moment didn't come out of nowhere. Oh no, like so many things in life, it was the final note of a silent song that had been playing for years. I just refused to hear it. My name is Evelyn. I'm 72 years old. I've spent most of my life cooking dinners. No one thanked me for sending birthday cards that were barely opened and keeping every scar to myself. And yet, I still believed that family meant something, until the day I stopped being one of them. The day my own daughter, the little girl I once rocked to sleep, who I protected through every nightmare, turned her back and closed the door, was the day I realized I had raised a stranger who now wanted nothing to do with me. And that day, standing in her driveway, while the sky opened up and poured down like tears from heaven, I realized something else. This wasn't just about me being left behind. This was about reclaiming something I had forgotten I owned. My voice, my dignity, my worth. And this is how it happened. My daughter's name is Lacey. When she was born, I thought God had given me a second chance at life. I held her tiny hand, kissed her soft cheeks, and whispered promises I had no idea how hard they'd be to keep. I'll always be there for you, always. She grew up in a modest home, nothing fancy, but full of warmth. Her father, Mark, wasn't much of a talker, but he loved her. At least, I thought he did. We both did the best we could. I gave up promotions at work, missed vacations, stayed up late sewing her school costumes when she forgot to tell me until the night before. I didn't complain. That's what mothers do. But looking back, I realize now, I might have given too much. You see, when you spend decades putting someone else first, sometimes they begin to believe it's your job. Lacey went to college with the help of money I'd secretly saved for retirement. You can always work a few more years, Mark had said when I told him. And I did. I worked 10 more years after I was ready to stop, just to make sure she wouldn't start her life burdened like I had. When she got married, I was the one in the kitchen for 3 days straight, preparing homemade dishes for the reception. I smiled through swollen feet and aching hands. I even gave her and her new husband a down payment for their first house. She never asked me once how I managed it, but it didn't matter to me at the time. What mattered was that she was building a life. I believed my purpose was to give, even when giving emptied me. Years passed. Grandchildren came. And slowly, something began to shift. I went from mom to can you babysit, from how are you to silence. Still, I showed up. I never missed a birthday. I dropped off groceries when money was tight. I cleaned her house when she was too tired. I never said no, until one day I did. It was the weekend of her anniversary. I had the flu. I could barely get out of bed. She wanted me to keep the kids overnight. When I said, "Sweetheart, I'm really sick. I don't think I can," she went silent. That silence echoed into something much colder than I ever expected. A few weeks later, I got a text. Not a call, a text. "I don't need your drama, Mom. I'm done. You're dead to me." I stared at the screen like it would change. It didn't. I didn't cry right away. I didn't scream. I just sat, frozen in a world where somehow everything I had done meant nothing. After that message, those 6 brutal words, "You're dead to me." Mom, something inside me broke in a way I didn't know was possible. I kept staring at my phone like it might light up again. Like she'd follow it with, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean it." But it didn't come. A week passed, then 2. No calls, no texts, not even from my grandkids. I began to question everything. Was I really that easy to erase? Had I made her feel unloved all these years and just didn't see it? My mind spiraled in the silence. I replayed every word, every moment, trying to find where I went wrong. But the truth, I didn't need to be perfect. I just needed to be needed, and suddenly I wasn't. The walls of my house started to feel tighter. The quiet buzz of the refrigerator sounded louder. Meals felt tasteless. Days bled into nights, and nights into hollow mornings. I didn't tell anyone what happened. Not my sister, not the church ladies I occasionally had coffee with. I didn't want pity. I didn't want advice. I just wanted to understand, but the understanding never came. One Sunday, I gathered enough courage to drive past her house. I stayed on the opposite side of the street, engine idling. I saw my grandchildren, my babies, playing in the yard. They looked taller. I wondered what shows they were watching now, what they had for breakfast, if they even asked about me. And just as I was about to drive off, Lacey walked out the door with a tray of lemonade in her hands. She was smiling, happy, untouched by the ache that was eating me alive. That's when it hit me like cold water. She was doing just fine without me, and that hurt even more than the silence. It made me question my worth, my identity, and the very meaning of what it meant to be a mother. Had I loved too much, or had I loved wrong? All I knew for sure was that I was living in a world where I no longer had a name in her story. I was just gone. You know, when people talk about grief, they usually mean death, a funeral, a goodbye. But the kind of grief I was going through, there was no funeral, no flowers, no casseroles from neighbors or warm embraces. Just an echo in my chest, a kind of hollow that only comes when someone you love deeply pretends you never existed. It's like walking into a room where your photograph used to hang and finding a blank wall instead. That's how it felt to be cut out of my daughter's life, and it wasn't just her. The silence spread like wildfire. My son, who used to call me every other Sunday, stopped without explanation. Birthdays came and went. Not a single card, not even a text. I was disappearing. Not because I had passed, but because I had been erased. And still, I did what mothers do. I blamed myself. Maybe I had been too strict when she was young. Maybe I hadn't said I love you enough. Maybe I'd said it too much. I even tried to write her a letter once. I sat at the kitchen table for hours trying to find the right words. Not to argue, not to beg. Just to remind her that I was still here, still breathing, still loving her. But when I held the pen, my hands shook. What if she read it and laughed? What if she threw it away without opening it? In the end, I folded the blank paper and tucked it back in the drawer. And I cried. Cried for the child I raised, for the woman I no longer knew, and for the mother I wasn't allowed to be anymore. It's a strange thing, isn't it? To feel like a ghost in a life you helped build. And yet, even in that darkness, something inside me whispered, "You are still here." And if I was still here, maybe, just maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe the story wasn't finished. There's something about being alone that sharpens your senses. I'd sit in the quiet of my tiny living room, the clock ticking too loud, and I'd remember everything. Not just the pain, but the moments they couldn't take away, no matter how much they pretended I didn't exist. I remembered holding my daughter for the first time, swaddled in a yellow blanket I crocheted myself. I remembered the way her tiny fingers wrapped around mine, and I thought, this is love. This is forever. I remembered the late nights helping her with homework, her tear-streaked face, when she failed her first exam, the way she crawled into my bed after nightmares well into her teenage years, because somehow my presence made the monsters disappear. Funny how I became the monster in her story. But those memories, they belonged to me, and I clung to them like a life raft. There's a kind of power in remembering who you are. Because when people try to rewrite your story, you realize that you are the author. So I started to write again. Not letters this time. Not apologies. Just truth. I wrote down every memory, every feeling. I wrote down the sacrifices. The times I went without so they could have more. The Christmas I pawned my wedding ring to buy toys. The job I quit to care for her newborn son. I wrote it all, not out of bitterness, but to remind myself that I had lived a life of love, that I was not disposable, that I mattered even if they refused to see me. And that's when it hit me. If they could throw me away so easily, maybe they never saw me clearly in the first place. That realization didn't break me, it awakened me. Because maybe this wasn't a story about being left behind. Maybe it was about finally walking forward on my own. It was a Thursday, the kind of day where the sky hangs heavy but not enough to rain. Just gray, just quiet. That morning, the phone rang. It hadn't rung in weeks, months maybe. I had almost forgotten the sound. I stared at the screen. Her name. My daughter. The one who said I was dead to her. My hand trembled. The air in the room changed. Everything slowed down. She was calling me. For a brief second, a flood of feelings rushed in: hope, confusion, longing, fear. Had she changed her mind? Was this the moment, the redemption arc I had dreamed of? But then I remembered something. I remembered the last words she said to me. I don't need you. You were never enough. You're just a burden. I remembered standing in the hallway after she slammed the door. I remembered the sound of my own sobs, the taste of betrayal, and I realized something deeply painful, but freeing. If I picked up that phone, I wouldn't be answering out of love, I'd be answering out of habit. The habit of always showing up, of always forgiving, of always hoping. And I was tired. Tired of giving when there was nothing given back. Tired of being the only one who reached across the canyon. So I didn't answer, not to punish her, but to protect me. That one small choice felt like climbing a mountain. But when I set the phone down, something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge. It was peace. Because I finally realized I didn't need an apology to start healing. I just needed to stop bleeding for people who never noticed I was cut open in the first place. And in that silence, something unexpected happened. I felt strong. Days passed. Then a week, then 2. She didn't call again. There was no follow-up text, no message, no knock at the door. But oddly, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt clear. I started waking up with a different kind of ache. Not the ache of missing someone, but the ache of rediscovering who I was without them. For years, my identity had been tightly wound around being her mother, her provider, her protector, her shadow. I had lost myself in the name Mom. And somewhere along the way, I stopped asking myself what I wanted, what I dreamed of, what I deserved. In that silence, I began to hear my own voice again. It started small. I cooked a dish I loved, not one anyone else requested. I bought a new pair of shoes just because they made me feel beautiful. I even rearranged the furniture. For the first time in a long time, I felt like the space was mine. It's a strange thing learning to live in a house that once echoed with pain and teaching it to breathe joy again. But what surprised me most was this. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I didn't rehearse old arguments in the shower or cry into pillows that had heard too many tears. No, I had entered a new phase, not of forgetting, but of forgiving without reinviting. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't always reconciliation. Sometimes it's just releasing the weight so you can walk forward without dragging your past behind you like a chain. She may never come back. She may never apologize. And if she does, I don't know if I'll answer, but I'll be okay either way. Because for the first time in decades, I'm learning how to love someone I had forgotten for too long. Me. It was a Tuesday morning, sunlight spilling through the curtains, the smell of fresh coffee swirling through the air, when I noticed a figure standing just beyond the garden gate. At first, I thought it might be a delivery man, but he didn't move. He wasn't holding a package. He was just standing there. Watching. I opened the window a crack and called out, "Can I help you?" He took off his hat. "Mrs. Layla Green," he asked softly. "Yes," I replied cautiously. "I'm well. I work with a nonprofit that supports elderly women who've experienced abandonment and emotional abuse. Your name was referred to us by someone anonymously." My stomach turned. Someone new. He must have noticed the worry in my eyes because he quickly added, "Don't worry, ma'am. We don't ask questions unless you want to talk. We're just here to offer resources, support, a chance To connect. That word struck something in me, connect. I hadn't connected with anyone in what felt like forever. He handed me a pamphlet. Weekly meetings, therapy options, a support circle named Silver Daughters. Something in that name tugged at my soul. Silver Daughters, I repeated aloud, my voice trembling. He smiled gently and nodded. It's for women like you, who've given everything and were left with silence. That evening, I sat in the quiet again, pamphlet in hand, tea untouched. Could I go? Could I really show up to a room full of strangers and say, my daughter told me I was dead to her? Would they understand? Would they judge? But then I thought, maybe they already did understand. Maybe they had heard worse, lived worse. Maybe I'd find pieces of myself in their stories. And maybe, just maybe, I wouldn't feel so alone. That night, I didn't cry. I just folded the pamphlet neatly and placed it on my nightstand. Hope. It's strange how it can arrive on a stranger's breath. The room smelled of lavender and old wood. Chairs were arranged in a circle, and the lighting was soft, gentle, like the way someone would dim the light to let an old wound breathe. It was my first meeting at Silver Daughters, and I was terrified. I wore my best blouse, the one with the tiny embroidered roses, and brushed my hair 3 times more than usual. I needed to feel worthy, presentable, human. As I walked in, a woman with white curls and deep smile lines stood and greeted me. You must be Layla, she said. Her voice was honey over gravel, gentle but real. I nodded, managing only a whisper. Yes, we're glad you came. You're safe here. That word again. Safe. It was foreign, almost like a sound from a distant childhood memory. But it softened me. The meeting began with a ritual. Each woman placed a single object in the center of the circle. One offered a faded photo, another a broken rosary. Someone placed a half-burned candle. When it was my turn, I hesitated, then reached into my bag and pulled out a crumpled birthday card from years ago. The last one my daughter had ever given me before she told me I was dead to her. I placed it down like a quiet confession. When I finally spoke, my voice cracked. She told me I was a burden, that I should stop calling, that I was dead to her. And I believed her. The room held its breath with me. Then a woman across from me leaned forward, tears in her eyes. She said the same to me, she whispered, and like that, the dam broke. We cried together, our pain not duplicated, but echoed. We weren't alone. Our grief wasn't a solitary prison. And in that circle, surrounded by women who had lived through silent wars, I felt something stir inside me. Dignity. It was still there, bruised, shaken, but alive. That night, I didn't cry from pain. I cried because I had found something even my daughter's rejection hadn't destroyed. Belonging. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I sat at my kitchen table, sunlight pouring in through the blinds, like quiet encouragement, and opened a fresh page in my old stationery set. The paper was slightly yellowed, the edges curled from time, but it smelled faintly of lilac, and that was enough to make me feel ready. I picked up my pen hands, trembling slightly, and wrote her name. To my daughter. And then I just let it pour. You once told me I was dead to you, that loving me cost you too much, that I had failed you as a mother. But I need you to know something now, not for your sake, but for mine. I gave you everything, my time, my silence, my forgiveness, even when I didn't understand why I needed to offer it. I cooked meals for you when my hands ached. I sold jewelry to buy you school clothes. I let your father speak down to me so you wouldn't see us fall apart. And still, it wasn't enough. And still, you erased me. But I'm writing to tell you something I never dared to say before I forgive you. Not because what you did was right. Not because it doesn't still hurt. But because I finally understand your words were never about me. They were about your own pain, and I won't carry it anymore. You don't have to write back. You don't even have to read this. But I needed you to know. I am still alive, and I matter. I matter. I folded the letter gently. I didn't mail it. I didn't need to. Because that day, for the first time in years, I walked with a little more spine. I smiled at the barista. I bought myself a slice of cherry pie. I even wore my favorite earrings, the ones she said made me look like too much. Because too much is better than not enough. About a week after I wrote that letter, I never sensed something unexpected happened. I was sitting alone at the little park near my apartment feeding the birds like I used to with my late husband when a young woman sat beside me. She looked maybe in her early 30s, tired eyes, a soft voice carrying groceries, and the weight of something heavy in her posture. At first we didn't speak, but then, as I reached into the bag for another handful of seeds, I accidentally dropped it. She picked it up for me. Our hands touched. She smiled. And that's how the conversation began. Her name was Mia. She had just moved to town and was struggling with the grief of losing her mother. Regret, guilt, and silence hung around her like ghosts. She said she didn't have anyone left to talk to. I said I hadn't had someone listen in years. So we sat, we shared stories, and eventually I told her everything. I told her about my daughter. I told her about that awful moment, the rain, the silence, the pain. She didn't interrupt. She didn't ask for more. She just let me speak. When I finished, I looked down, afraid of how she might judge me. But she reached out and gently took my hand. "You're not forgotten," she said. "You're still here, and your story, it matters." That night I cried, but not out of pain. It was something else, release maybe, or healing. That small act of kindness from someone who didn't owe me a thing reminded me that my voice had value, that my life, however quiet or dismissed it had been by those closest to me, still had meaning. And sometimes it's not our family that brings us back to life, it's the strangers who see us when we feel invisible. After that moment in the park with Mia, something inside me shifted. Her kindness had peeled back the rusted armor I'd worn for years. I realized I didn't need to wait for validation from those who abandoned me. I could speak my truth clearly, calmly, and finally for myself. So I wrote a letter. But not the kind of letter filled with sorrow or begging. This one was different. It was a declaration. I wrote it to my daughter, and this time I planned to send it. "Dear Emily, you told me I was dead to you, but I am very much alive. I am alive in every sunrise I watch with gratitude. I am alive in every quiet step I take, no longer weighed down by the hope you'll call. I gave you my life. I don't regret the love I gave, but I regret staying silent for so long. You hurt me, and I forgive you, not because you asked, but because I will not carry the poison of your choices in my blood any longer. I am choosing peace. I am choosing my voice. I am choosing me." You don't have to respond. You don't have to feel guilty. You don't even have to understand. But know this, I did not disappear. I just stopped waiting. I folded the letter and mailed it. No return address, just a message into the wind, a closing of a door, and maybe the quiet opening of another. I didn't know what Emily would do. Maybe nothing. Maybe burn it. But that wasn't the point. This time the story was mine. This time I wasn't the forgotten grandmother. I was a woman weathered, yes, but not broken. I had survived storms worse than the one that soaked me on that porch. And now I was standing. After mailing that letter, I felt something unexpected lightness. Not the happiness people expect after reconciliation or closure, but a freedom deep and real. For once, I had nothing left to prove. No words left unsaid. No secrets left to hide behind. I started spending more time walking around the neighborhood, not hiding, not watching over my shoulder for someone from the past, just walking, moving forward. One morning, I passed by a small thrift shop. In the window sat a large antique mirror with edges worn like old lace. Something about it drew me in. I went inside, bought it, and carried it home myself. When I leaned it against my bedroom wall and looked in, I braced myself out of habit for the self-criticism, the regrets, the lines of sadness. But that day, I didn't see a forgotten woman. I saw a survivor. The wrinkles told stories of strength. The silver in my hair shimmered like battle medals. My eyes, though tired, still had that flicker, The same flicker, Mia saw the same one my daughter had tried to extinguish with her words. But it was still there. I reached out and touched the glass, whispering to my own reflection. You didn't vanish, you evolved. That evening, I lit a candle. Not for mourning, but for presence. I wasn't living in memories anymore. I was here, awake, alive. I no longer needed a phone call or a knock on the door to feel seen. I had already come back to life, and I had done it with my own hands. It had been nearly a year since I mailed that letter. No reply, no acknowledgement. And truthfully, I had stopped waiting. Peace had settled over my days like the quiet after a long storm. Until one rainy afternoon, a knock came at my door. I opened it slowly, and there she was, my daughter. She looked older, not just in years, but in the kind of weight life puts on a person who's been running from herself. Her eyes, those same eyes I once kissed goodnight, were rimmed with something raw. Not just sorrow, not just guilt. Something like fear. Mama, she said, her voice trembling. Can I come in? I stood there a moment, the rain tapping behind her memory, flickering all around us. My heart beat not with anger, not even with hope, but with clarity. I nodded. She stepped in and looked around like she was seeing me for the first time. Not the woman she wanted to escape, but the woman who survived. The woman who endured. We sat at the kitchen table, the silence heavy sacred. She pulled something from her bag. My letter. Folded, worn, tear-stained. I've read this more times than I can count, she whispered. I hated you for being strong. I hated myself more for being weak. She reached across the table, her hand shaking as it touched mine. I can't undo what I said, or what I did. But if you can still find room in your heart, I want to learn how to be your daughter again. I didn't cry. Not then. I had cried all my tears in basements and bathrooms, in dreams that never came true. But I did something more powerful. I forgave. Not because she asked, but because I no longer needed her apology to be free. I placed my other hand over hers and said quietly, Then let's begin, from here. That evening, after she left, I sat by the window, tea warm in my hand, the sky shifting from gray to gold as the rain passed. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. I felt whole. For the first time in decades, the silence in my home wasn't heavy. It wasn't filled with unsaid things or haunting echoes of pain. It was peaceful. It was mine. My story wasn't clean. It wasn't pretty. But it was real. It was scarred and sacred, bruised and beautiful. And it belonged to me. Some people spend their lives waiting for others to love them the way they deserve. I stopped waiting. I chose to love myself quietly, steadily, with every breath that reminded me I was still here, still standing, still worthy. There will always be people who abandon you, who say things they can never unsay, who leave you in the rain, soaked, humiliated, forgotten. But hear me, whoever you are not trash. You are not too old to start again. You are not too broken to be whole. And if you ever forget that, remember my story. Remember that an old woman once sat by a window, smiled at the sunset, and whispered, I gave them everything, and they gave me nothing. But I found myself, and that was more than enough. Now I ask you, what would you have done if you were me? Because maybe some part of you already is.